This brings us to chapter 2, which is, again, I believe, the foundation of end-time prophecy. We won't be reading every verse. We will read the key verses and, of course, discuss them. There's a chart that we'll be putting together for this complete study that, again, will be available at the end of this. But we're building it piece by piece so that you can see the foundation that is laid, and you can see it laid biblically, and you can see how every brick fits on top of each other perfectly. And so that this understanding is not just taken from thin air, but is built from the foundation, brick by brick, into a complete biblical understanding. And we're going to get started with that. I do have another study where I've read all of these verses, but this is just going to touch on the verses that are important for this particular study. Getting started. Daniel chapter 2. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then he commanded to call the magicians, and the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. And the king answered and said unto the Chaldeans, The thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream, and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. So Nebuchadnezzar wasn't stupid. He knew that if he told these magicians and Chaldeans and astrologers what the dream was, they would make up an interpretation. They likely had dream scrolls prescribed that they would just go back to the king and say, this is what your dream meant, king. Go ahead and hook us up with all those great things you said. But again, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't stupid, so when they asked to be told the dream, he issues a command. That word thing is the Aramaic or Hebrew milah, and it means command. So when Nebuchadnezzar says, the thing is gone from me, what he's really saying is, I'm issuing this command. If you don't tell me the dream and the interpretation, I'm going to kill you and your families. Chapter 7, they answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. And the king answered and said, I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing or command is gone from me. So here they are, they're put into this situation now where they know that if they don't tell the interpretation of the dream first by telling the dream, they're going to be killed. And this command goes out to all the magicians and everyone that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were now a part of. So this command to kill all of them would have affected them as well. And the message then gets to Daniel that, hey, it's time to die, basically. But Daniel asked for the opportunity to speak to King Nebuchadnezzar. And here we pick it up in verse 27. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, and the magicians, and the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that reveals secrets, and makes known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. It's important to really emphasize that point, that Nebuchadnezzar's dream related to the latter days. Thy dream and the vision of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. So what is that? That's a timeline. Okay, so far we know just from these few verses that Nebuchadnezzar's dream was a timeline that had impact in the latter days. Continuing verse 29, and he that reveals secrets make known to thee what shall come to pass. Again, this is clearly a prophetic timeline that was given to Nebuchadnezzar in this dream, and it's a timeline prophecy that extends into the latter days. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living at that time, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightst know the thoughts of thy heart. So the meaning of Nebuchadnezzar's dream is relevant to those living in the latter days. Verse 31. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. So now Daniel is telling the dream. Okay, so all the wise men, they could not tell the dream. They were going to make up an interpretation. But Daniel goes to his friends, shares with them the situation, and then they essentially have a prayer meeting to where they ask for the Most High God to reveal the dream and the vision so that they could be representatives of the Most High in this Babylonian system. So verse 31, Daniel is now explaining the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. He says, Thou, O king, saw, and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till a stone that was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. So what Nebuchadnezzar saw was one continual series of events that extended into the latter days, and it's an unbroken timeline. In verse 36, Daniel is now going to give the interpretation. So he's given him the dream. He told him what he saw. He said, you saw this you saw this great image. It had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze or brass, legs of iron, feet that were part iron and part clay, and this whole image was hit at its feet by a stone that was cut without hand. The stone grew into a mountain and covered the whole earth. So that's what Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. So now Daniel is going to provide the interpretation of that dream. Here in verse 36. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Verse 40, and the fourth kingdom. So these aren't just individual kings we're talking about. We're talking about kingdoms here. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaks all these, it shall break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as thou saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as for the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with miry clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. Wow. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and a sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is, that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. In chapter 3, you have the story of the statue where Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah refused to bow down to it. Some might ask, well, where was Daniel? Well, Daniel, and the news had to get back to Nebuchadnezzar that they didn't obey. Well, it says here that Daniel was sat in the gate of the king. So Daniel wasn't there on the plains of Shinar where he erected that statue and was told to bow down and worship. So I just want to point that out, because I know I was in a group one time and there was a discussion as to why wasn't Daniel with Hananiah, why wasn't Daniel with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in that scene. But again, Daniel just wasn't there. All right, so that's chapter 2, and what we see in chapter 2 is we see this image of head of various metals, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet of part iron, part clay, and it was destroyed by a rock that pulverized this whole thing and grew, that was not cut with any hands, but grew into a whole mountain. Okay, and this dream represented successive worldly kingdoms, but these kingdoms would be destroyed by Yahweh's kingdom when that time comes. And again, remember that this dream, this vision, is relevant to those living in the latter days. You're going to see when that time comes. So we have this chart. This is the chart I mentioned. We're putting this together in this study. We see here that Nebuchadnezzar is told that the first kingdom in this series of kingdoms is Babylon. And it was represented by this head of gold. And there would be a second kingdom of silver, a third kingdom. And then it says the fourth kingdom would be of iron, but it would be divided into a kingdom that was of part iron and part clay. And that kingdom would be struck, which encapsulates all of the ideologies of the kingdoms before it, and will be destroyed by a rock that was not cut with any hands. Again, that grew into a whole mountain and covered the earth. So that's Daniel chapter 2 in terms of the vision that Nebuchadnezzar saw. And what we're going to do is build on top of that foundation. We're going to complete this whole chart.